Jesus implicitly rejected the Apocrypha of Scripture by referring to the entire accepted Jewish canon of Scripture. He says, quote, "From the blood of Abel," which is a reference to Genesis 4:8, "to the blood of Zechariah," which is a reference to 2 Chronicles, "who was killed between the altar and the house of God, yes, I tell you, it shall be charged against this generation." That's found in Luke 11:51. You can also look at Matthew 23:35, which has the same basic wording. So what is Jesus doing in this passage? Well, Abel was the first martyr in the Old Testament from the book of Genesis, while Zechariah was the last martyr in the book of Chronicles. In the Hebrew canon, the first book was Genesis and the last book was Chronicles. Their Hebrew Bible is basically known as the Tanakh. They contained all the same books as the standard 39 books, which were accepted by Protestants today, but they were just arranged differently. For example, all the 12 minor prophets, Hosea through Malachi, were contained in one book. This is why there are only 24 books in the Hebrew Bible today. By Jesus referring to Abel and Zechariah, he was canvassing the entire canon of the Hebrew Scriptures, which included the same 39 books as Protestants accept today. Therefore, Jesus implicitly rejected the Apocrypha as Scripture. Now, some people will reply and say, well, there was no canon of Scripture that time period. Okay, if there's no official list, that's fine. But Jesus is still making an analogy. He's making a parallel. He's drawing on something. By referring to Abel and Zechariah, he's referring to the first and the last of a series of writings. And that's exactly what we have in the Tanakh today. So Jesus had some sort of list of authoritative scriptures that he at least viewed as having authority. And there's no indications that he viewed the Apocrypha as part of that authoritative writings.
You liar!
I also want you to notice a second passage of Scripture with me, Matthew 23 and verse 35. Jesus there pronounced this upon the wicked Pharisees. He said, "That on you may come all the righteous blood shed on the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar." Now, this passage is very significant because it covers from the first book of the Bible, Genesis, when it mentions Abel, to the last book of the Hebrew Bible, which was Chronicles, when he mentions Zechariah, which chronologically is the time of Malachi as we have our Bible laid out today. And so here's the point. Jesus recognized as Scripture from Genesis to the time of Malachi, which incidentally excludes the books of the Old Testament Apocrypha.
Liar! Liar!
Get back, witch!
I'm not a witch, I'm your wife! But after what you just said, I'm not even sure I want to be that anymore!
Let me give you one last one here. Luke chapter 11, verse 51. "From the blood of Abel unto the blood of Zechariahs, which perished between the altar and the temple, verily I say unto you, it shall be required of this generation." So Jesus is mentioning the first murder, the first killing. And then he is quoting, and when he is talking about Zechariahs, he's talking about 2 Chronicles chapter 24, verses 20 to 22. Now, as the Old Testament Jew laid out the New Testament, their scriptures, they began with the book of Genesis, but they did not end with Malachi as we end with. They ended with Chronicles. And so Jesus here is quoting literally the very first murder, killing, to the very last murder, the last killing. And he's encompassing all of this and giving a scope and sequence of two events, one at the very beginning and one at the very end of what is the Old Testament canon.
You're lying, and I know you're lying.
You lied to me.
You're strong, but I never taught you to lie. That's why you're so bad at it.
Dave, I find your story simply not believable.
Really?